There is a creature gliding across the water right now that has been sending messages to humans for thousands of years, and almost nobody reads them correctly. You've seen swans. You've probably photographed swans. You may have even fed them bread at a park, which, by the way, is genuinely bad for them, and we'll get to why that matters in a moment. But here's the question I want you to sit with from the very first second of this video. What if swans are not being aggressive, territorial, or random? What if every single signal they send has a precise meaning, and you've simply never been taught the code? Because that's exactly what science is beginning to confirm. Swans have one of the most sophisticated non-verbal communication systems in the entire bird kingdom. Researchers at the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust in the UK, who have been studying mute swans for over 40 years, found that these birds use a layered combination of posture, feather positioning, vocalization frequency, and movement choreography to communicate states of threat, invitation, distress, and warning. Not just to other swans. To you. To anyone watching. And once you know the 5 signs, you cannot unsee them. Let's start with the one that everyone misreads. Sign number 1 is called busking, and if you've ever walked too close to a swan's nest and had a large white bird suddenly puff up like a feathered balloon, arch its wings into a dramatic heart shape, and begin gliding toward you at an unsettlingly determined pace, you've seen it. Most people call this aggression. Most people are wrong. Busking is a warning. It is the swan's way of saying, I see you, I am bigger than you think, and you have approximately 10 seconds to reconsider your life choices. The critical thing to understand about busking is the direction of the neck. When the neck curves backward and inward, tucked toward the body in a tight S, the swan is performing a warning display that has not escalated into a genuine threat. It is communicating. The moment that neck begins to straighten and extend forward, with the head dropping low over the water like a missile targeting system, that is a different conversation entirely. That is the swan telling you the warning period is over. A wildlife photographer named Paul Sora documented a remarkable interaction in 2019 in Norfolk, England. He had approached the same nesting pair of mute swans for 3 consecutive days. On the first day, the male busked at him from about 30 meters. On the second day, from 20 meters. On the third day, the swan swam directly to him, stopped 2 meters away, held the busking posture for 11 seconds, and then, this is the part that Sora said he'll never forget, it turned and slowly swam away. He described it later as one of the most deliberate acts of communication he had ever witnessed in 30 years of wildlife photography. The swan was not trying to attack him. The swan was teaching him a boundary. Does that change how you think about that swan in your local park? Because it should. Sign number 2 is something researchers call wing flagging, and it is dramatically underappreciated as a warning system. When a swan raises one or both wings asymmetrically, not the full busking arch, but a partial, slightly lopsided lift, it is signaling environmental distress. This is not about you. This is about something in the broader environment that the swan perceives as a threat that you have not yet detected. This is where it gets fascinating from a pure behavioral science perspective. Swans have a visual field of approximately 340 degrees. They can see nearly all the way around their head simultaneously. Their color vision extends into the ultraviolet spectrum. When a swan wing flags in a direction you weren't looking, there is genuine scientific reason to turn around and check what's there. Ornithologists studying migratory swans along the Danube Delta, which is, incidentally, one of the largest swan habitats in Europe, and absolutely worth an article on its own, noted that wing flagging behavior in whooper swans consistently preceded environmental disturbances, including approaching boats, predatory birds at distance, and changes in weather patterns, by an average of 4 to 7 minutes before humans in the same area detected anything unusual. 4 to 7 minutes. Swans were essentially functioning as living early warning systems. Sign number 3 is one of the most misunderstood sounds in nature, the hiss. People assume a hissing swan is simply angry. But listen more carefully, and I mean that literally. A hiss that is short, sharp, and repeated rapidly is a warning directed at a specific threat. A hiss that is long, drawn out, and sustained is something fundamentally different. It is a swan in pain or distress. Possibly injured. Possibly ill. Possibly trapped. Wildlife rescue organizations report that this distinction costs animals their lives. People hear a hissing swan, assume aggression, give it space, walk away, when in fact the bird was calling for help in the only language it has. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds has logged hundreds of cases where this exact misinterpretation delayed rescue attempts by hours, sometimes with fatal consequences. So here is a question I genuinely want you to think about and answer in the comments below. If you encountered a hissing swan alone on a riverbank, apparently unable to move, would you know the difference between a territorial warning and a distress call? And more importantly, would you know what to do? Write it out. I want to know what your instinct would be, because this tells us something important about how humans read animal communication, and the answers might surprise you. Sign number 4 involves the eyes, and this is where behavioral psychology and animal cognition research collide in a way that is genuinely stunning. Swans have orange-red orbital rings, the visible flesh around their eyes, and the coloration and tension of this ring changes measurably with emotional state. More importantly, swans are one of the few bird species that have been documented engaging in direct, sustained eye contact with humans as a deliberate communicative act. A 2021 study published in the journal Animal Cognition examined eye contact behavior between mute swans and humans at 12 wetland sites in the UK, and found that swans that held eye contact for more than 3 seconds with an approaching human were significantly more likely to be warning of genuine territorial intrusion than those that broke gaze and turned away. The act of holding your gaze, not breaking it, not looking away, is the swan saying, "I know you are here, I know what you are doing, and I am watching you specifically." There's an almost uncomfortable intelligence to this. These are not animals operating on pure instinct. These are birds that track individual humans, remember faces. There is solid research on avian facial recognition going back to Cambridge studies in the 2000s, and adjust their warning behaviors based on prior encounters. That swan that seems to be targeting you specifically at the pond every weekend? There is a real possibility it recognizes you. Which brings us to sign number 5, and in many ways the most important one, the one that most people never notice because they're already backing away from signs 1 through 4. It is the withdrawal display. When a swan has delivered its warning, the busking, the hissing, the eye contact, and the perceived threat, that would be you, begins to retreat, a swan that is genuinely warning you rather than attacking will perform a very specific behavioral sequence. It will hold its position, watch you go, and then execute what can only be described as a deliberate reset. Wings folded precisely, neck returning to the classic upright S-curve, a slow turn back toward whatever it was doing before you arrived. This is the swan confirming that the warning achieved its purpose. That you read the message correctly. That the interaction resolved without escalation. Scientists call this the post-display resolution sequence. And here is what makes it extraordinary from a cognitive standpoint. It only occurs when the swan assessed the threat as successfully deterred. If the threat is still present, there is no resolution sequence. The bird stays locked in warning mode. The withdrawal display is, in essence, the swan closing the conversation. Now, I want to come back to something I mentioned at the very beginning, the bread. This matters more than you might think. Swans that are regularly fed by humans become desensitized to human presence, but not in the way we assume. Research from the University of Exeter found that habituation to humans actually makes swans more likely to escalate warning behaviors earlier and more intensely when those interactions turn unexpected or threatening, because the baseline of fear has been recalibrated. A swan that has learned humans bring food responds with disproportionate alarm when a human behaves differently than expected. The very act of feeding them has been rewiring how their warning system interprets us. Which means every single person who throws bread into a pond is subtly altering the communication dynamic of an entire colony of animals. That's a remarkable amount of influence for something that feels completely innocent. So let me ask you this, and I really do want your honest answer in the comments. After everything we've talked about today, do you think most people underestimate swans, or do you think they overestimate them in a different way? Because I've noticed 2 camps. People who think swans are simple, decorative, semi-aggressive birds that occasionally chase joggers. And people who romanticize them so completely that they miss the actual intelligence operating right in front of them. Both are misreading the same animal. Both are missing the conversation. The silent language of swans is not silent at all. It is precise, layered, contextual, and in many cases more nuanced than the warning systems used by far larger, more famous predators. We just weren't listening. The next time you're near a swan and it begins to shift its feathers, arch those enormous wings, or hold your gaze a second longer than feels comfortable. Don't panic, don't run, don't pull out your phone for a photo. Watch. Read the signs. Because the swan is trying to tell you something, and it has been trying to tell us something for a very long time. We are finally starting to understand the language. Let's not stop now. If this video changed how you think about swans, or about animal communication in general, drop your reaction below. Tell us about an encounter you've had. Tell us what you thought was happening, and what you now think was actually happening. And if you want to go deeper on the psychology of animals that are hiding extraordinary intelligence in plain sight, the next video is already waiting for you. You're going to want to see it.